Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we'll release version 2 of our square banks. Now, I've sold a ton of our square version of our banks for CNCKing.com over the past year, and they sell fine. There's no issue with them, but they always have little things that bug me about them, and things that, since learning how to actually do this stuff myself in the shop, I've wanted to tweak and improve upon. And you can only just do minor tweaks to a design after a while, and then just starts to get annoying. So you might as well just start all fresh. And that's what I did this round here. So I'll show you, I don't have too many of the originals left, actually. So we'll do a comparison. In this case here, it's both poplar. And you can see the original here and the new one here. Right away, you can see there's a lot more room for the coins. And that's something that bugged me about the previous version, as I learned how to do this stuff, is that because it's a squarish bank, a lot of your corners are square or sharp angles, and you actually lose quite a bit of internal volume because of that. And here's a G. So again, this here is actually red oak, and this is poplar. And by having this square inner corners, you're losing a lot of area that could be used up for coins. And you keep trying to sort of create a volume where you can't. And I decided at the end of the day, it's just easier to make the banks by default a little bit bigger. So by default, the banks before were all 8 inches tall, so proportionally wide. And the new ones are 9 inches tall, proportionally wide. Now they're also a little bit wider than the other ones too, again, to create more internal volume. I don't want, I can make these things 30 inches tall. It's not a problem at all with all the equipment I have here in the shop. But what I want to do is increase the space inside of here as much as possible, all the way around. Because the more space you have in here, the more coins you can hold, and therefore the more useful the actual bank is. Another thing I wanted to do was get rid of the sharp inner corners, or sharp outer corners. So I'll show you a little bit of an example here. So you can see the inside of the old bank, everything's totally, sharp angles everywhere. In the new ones, I've rounded that off a little bit. And again, it's a small little design detail that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I finally got around to doing it. And I think it just makes the aesthetic of the overall bank a lot better. Now they all have by default as well a chamfer, because that's another issue that I got feedback on, is the old banks when I first made these, this one happens to have a chamfer as well, but I didn't have a chamfer on them. And basically, look on the back side here, you can see how sharp this is. Now on the back it doesn't really matter because usually it's against a wall or on a mantle or something far away. But on the front, having a nice chamfer really helps break up the bank, give it a lot more detail that you wouldn't have otherwise. So again, an old trick for 3D modeling and animation is actually add chamfers everywhere, because it makes it a lot more aesthetically pleasing to the eye when you're looking at the animation. And here we are making another production run of custom poplar hardwood banks. In this case here we're making banks, pencil holders, and a couple other tests with the custom square bank series that I'm coming out version 2. Now I had a customer ask me recently, how come I'm showing all of this? Why don't I just show the finished banks and keep all this sort of stuff secret, so to speak? And to me, I think it the other way. I think, this stuff is fun. I enjoy making these banks and these other products using these processes. And I like sharing that. So to me, it's not, trade secrets. There's nothing secret in this world anymore, unless you go to incredibly high-end things. And to be able to share that with people so they know how their banks are made. So, once you order a bank, let's say from CNCKing.com, you give it to your kid, and your kid well, how is this made? Well, you just go to CNCKing.com, you can actually see how all of the banks are made. But the fun is you can also show the evolution from a year ago to now, and just how much has changed just from trial and error and experimentation to get to this point for making the banks. Now, as you're probably aware, on CNCKing.com, I actually have 2 libraries of designs for letter banks. And the reason for that is quite straightforward. Basically, some people like something a little bit sharper and stands out. and other people like something that's more sort of mellow and more relaxing, so to speak, aesthetically. So that's why I have the two versions. And I happen to have these ones here in the shop now. So you can see the square one, again, the larger size. This is 8 inches tall, this is 9 inches tall. And you see the inch makes quite a bit of a difference on the size of the bank. But again, the rounded one and the square one. Let's take a look at another one. Here's the E. So here's a square one versus a rounded one. Now you can see, even though this one's smaller, it seems to have so much more surface or volume inside of it to hold coins than the square ones. And that was, again, the issue I kept sort of butting heads on design-wise, because I was trying to create the same sort of space inside, but I just couldn't using the square designs. So I just redid them completely. And we'll take a look at one more. Now, of course, I could further customize these however you want. You know, every aspect of these banks I make in the shop, from the laminated wood all the way through the final finishing. In this case here, they're all plain, just so I have a consistent look on the website. But then, you know, I could add other finishing to make them look like basically any other wood. And the nice thing about poplar, of course, is that it finishes really, really well, sands really well. So if you want to have something that's a woodworking project, for instance, and you just want a bank to start off with what we make here, and then you customize it however you want, it's not a problem. We can also make strips, you know, basically if you think about a cutting board, you have strips of like zebra wood and all these exotic woods. We can do the same thing with these banks. So again, because everything's handled in-house, everything can be customized however you want. Now, one of the challenges I keep having with making these slabs is that they like to sort of warp on you once they dry. You might be kind of surprised, but glue is actually quite slippery when it's wet, especially when it's drying. Doesn't matter how many clamps you have it on, whatever, it still shifts a little bit here and there. Now, I've got that down quite a bit from the first time I ever did this stuff. So it's very minor what I end up having, but it does totally affect the finished thickness of the banks. And that's why on the website I have a tolerance of roughly 1/4 inch, plus or minus, because I start off really quite thick, relatively speaking. But then if there's a little bit of warping here and there or something moved, well, as you can see here, I'm flattening everything out. And I can't start making the banks until it's completely parallel and flat on both sides. There's no point in having one side flat and one side not flat, because then it will move during production. So that's why you see it happening twice on the video here. You see it goes dirty to clean and then dirty to clean, because basically I clean the back and then I clean the front. Now, I found it doesn't really matter if I do that on the glued side or the unglued side, because you gotta remember, we got gravity working here for me. So when I do the glue up, all the extra glue sort of comes down through the bottom. And I found no difference, you know, flattening that side first versus the other side. Another thing to keep in mind here is, you know, one of the rare times I actually did this, I didn't edit this part of the video at all. So it actually is sort of not real time. It's a 30 frame equal 1. So basically, every minute of this is equal to 1 second on the video that you see here. So it gives you an idea of how long it takes to actually produce these. And that excludes doing the slab, that excludes all this finishing, all the other kind of work that I do for these banks. Now, the nice thing about having a tool changer is a lot of this stuff can be automated, and it's so much faster. My old router would have to manually do the tool changes, and that would introduce a little bit of error. And then I would manually have to redo the height of the tool, because you can't just change the tool. You have to redo the height of the tool versus the material. And I would totally screw that every once in a while, because it takes so long to do. It gets kind of tedious to do that kind of work. So having a tool changer, even just with 4 tool changes, really helps for production wise to keep things really, really consistent and dead on. And it's just mind blowing to me. You know, I've had this machine for over a year now, and it still blows my mind just how wonderful it is to be able to do that small aspect of it. Now, you notice each one is basically made one at a time, although I'm using one tool to do every aspect of each bank. And what that means is, when I'm making these banks, whether I'm doing an A or an E, or I'm doing a skull bank, or I'm doing, pen and pencil holder, or any sort of thing else I could get out of this slab in one shot, it's basically made on demand. So let's say I had an order for 5 A's and 2 B's, and the 2 B's were one was square, one was round, and so forth, different sizes. It doesn't matter to the machine. It takes a little bit of programming for me at the other side to make it all happen, as you see here. It definitely is not an automated process, but that's the advantage that I have with this business, because I can custom fabricate to basically any spec. Now, the only thing I have to watch out for is when the customer says, well, I want this out of red oak, and I want this out of maple, and I want this out of sycamore, I want this out of poplar. Then, of course, the slab basically has to be all the same kind of wood. So that's why on the website, when you go to sandboxranch.com, there's a surprise me for a lot of the options. Because sometimes, I'll do a whole slab, it will be red oak, and somebody wanted a poplar, and then, well, I got to do another slab just for the poplar for that one. But if you happen to be lucky, in the queue, you might end up having what you thought was going to be poplar end up being red oak or zebra wood or maple or what have you. And there's nothing wrong with all these different wood species. Each one has a plus and a minus. They all have a different aesthetic. But of course, what I will do is also send you an email to confirm beforehand. So let's say you really wanted red oak, but you said surprise me on the website, and you don't want to end up with a poplar, for instance. My goal with sandboxranch.com was to come out with unique products that everybody can enjoy and have a little bit of something unique in your life. So this is actually part of it. I have a buddy who really likes skulls, and I thought right away I'm going to have to make a piggy bank in the shape of a skull. That's what this is here. Now, the frosting here is actually the laser engraved onto the clear acrylic. So by engraving on the clear acrylic, you get the flame polish, but you also have something that's a very consistent look on the front that won't fade, crack, or peel over time. Now, of course, if you wanted this to be black, I could do the same thing using polycarbonate or bulletproof glass. And again, you have a bulletproof glass or bulletproof skull bank, which would be kind of cool too. I do have an industrial sandblaster in the shop as well. So I am investigating doing these things with the sandblaster versus the laser. Each has a plus and a minus, but that means I could, if you wanted something like this out of glass, the sandblaster does a nicer result on it. Again, everything has a plus and a minus when it comes to custom production. This bank here, if you wanted to be bigger, smaller, different wood species, different finishing options, whatever, I could totally customize that however you want. Or if you want like a series of skulls or sort of Halloween theme or whatever, we can make that for you. Now, continuing on the theme here, again, every second of video that you see here is actually 30 seconds real time. There's quite a bit of work involved before the CNC and even after the CNC. And of course, I leave the skin on the bottom. If I took it off, it would be great, but there's no way the machine, I have 2 massive industrial pumps sucking down this slab. As you can see on the table, I have everything covered as much as I can. And I also have the slab screwed down onto the table to make sure nothing moves on me, because when I first started doing these things, I didn't realize how much stuff can move. And when you think about it, even if it moves, let's say 1/16 of an inch, the whole slab, 1/16, or even one little bank moves 1/16 of an inch, you might say, oh, that's nothing. It's massive, because what that means is, as I'm doing the routering of the banks, if it moves by that much, I'll be off by that much, which means I got to sand off 1/16 inch somewhere. And because it moved by that much, I have to sand it off the other side by the same amount. It just becomes impossible to do. Now, what you see here is the skull, and the skull is being laser engraved. The nice thing about the laser is I can get very, very fine detail. Of course, it goes out of focus whenever I do this kind of work. And so that means, it's the same process, same ideas when you have your name engraved on the front of the banks. It's exactly the same thing. It's a graphic instead of a name. And of course, I can customize that however you want. So let's say you wanted A for Albert, and you wanted a picture of a tree on the front, along with your name. We can do that for you just as easily. Now, this process here, just going again bank by bank, I'm clearing off some more dust because the shop is dusty. It's a woodworking, metal working, plastic working shop. So there's always dust and stuff that builds up. So as I do these banks, I check them over for quality. I see any sort of design issues because it is the first time I make this version of the square banks in real life. And when I see issues, I modify the design accordingly. So that's why it's an ongoing cleanup process. And the problem with the old banks that were the square ones is you get to a point where you just can't do any more changes. You've done all the changes you can, and there's still little tweaks here and there that you want to do, but because of the design sort of mold you've stuck yourself into, you just can't do them. So that's why after a year, I decided to just not scrap it, but basically just rethink, rebuild all those square banks, and I'm updating the website accordingly. So something else that I wanted to have on sandboxranch.com for a long time was actually pencil holders, pen and pencil holders. So here's two of my first tests of them. And actually it came out fine. There's no problem with the design itself. But then I realized why my previous pencil holders had internal dividers. And that's something I'm going to add to the next version of this. But you can also buy this one too if you want to hold other things. The reason we got the internal dividers is because when you put the pencils in, they like to fall in all over the place. So even if I just had like one divider here or a series of two, it'd be a lot more functional pencil case. So sort of wrapping your head around with the banks, I want as much internal volume as I can. And when it comes to pencil holders and those kind of things, well, it's a little bit different because you have to sacrifice internal volume in order to have something more useful to the customer. And at the end of the day, that's the whole goal of this, these banks. I want to make generational banks. I want to make banks and other products that are sort of related that I can do at the same time as these in one shot for customers. But I want to make them as durable and functional. And it's just wrapping your head around, the different design parameters for each. The nice thing about this is, as you saw, I made this literally at the same time as I made, the skull bank. Or I can make, any other bank at the same time. So it isn't any extra production work. And when you have a huge slab, you always end up with like little sections. And you don't quite know what to do with them. It ends up going to the fire pit, of course. But I can make a whole bunch of these things with the lost space. Because again, if we're mixing and matching a bunch of different banks, a whole bunch of different shapes, they all take up different areas on the slab. You always end up with little dead spaces here and there that would be nice to fill up because it doesn't cost any more or less to fill it up or not. So that's what I prefer to do. So looking for custom banks, pencil holders, or anything else custom, go to sandboxranch.com. You can order both libraries of our custom banks there. Pen and pencil holders are going to be coming very, very soon. And of course, you get the skull bank there right now too if you want to. Sandboxranch.com. I'll see you there. We make it for you and we ship it right to your door.